This is a presentation of a functional communication training in a school-wide positive behavior support. My name is Rafal Adar, and my teammates are Jessica Carr, Haley Hillard, Jackie Lee, and Timothy Mearston.
What is functional communication training? Functional communication training is an antecedent intervention where an appropriate communication technique is taught as a replacement for a problem behavior, also as known as a differential reinforcement procedure, in which an individual is taught an alternative response that results in the same class of reinforcement, identified as maintaining the problem behavior. So basically, if you have a child who is taking toys from another child, their purpose is to get those toys, and what you're going to want to teach them is a replacement for that behavior, like asking for the toys.
So who benefits from functional communication training? Two groups benefit from FCT, students and community. Students that benefit from functional communication training are those who display problem behaviors. FCT helps them dissipate their problem behaviors as well as increase their communication. Nonverbal students, they learn proper communication techniques, while verbal students learn more efficient communication. The community benefits from FCT as well. Parents as well as teachers, they gain an understanding of what their child or student is trying to communicate to them, and as well, they also learn a way to communicate with that child or student, therefore creating a seamless, more efficient, smoother communication between the student and parent or teacher.
So to implement functional communication training, there are a few steps. And the first one would be you need to identify the behavior that whatever the learner is engaging in. And you would do this by conducting what is called a functional behavior analysis. And then also to identify the reinforcer that maintains this behavior. And then next step would be you need to select a functional communicative response, which is what is going to be used to say or sign or use a picture to explain what they want. And you want to make sure this can be learned very quickly to replace the behavior. And the next you'll need to do is choose someone to implement the functional communication training to teach the learner. And then you need to contrive many situations so the learner can be prompted and taught to use functional communication training, and also to have a reinforcer, something that the child really likes and is motivated for. That way they will learn the skill really quickly. And then the fifth step is to teach the communicative response to the learner by using what we call least to most prompting. Talk about that, how to use that technique. And then you always want to provide that reinforcer after the child exhibits a communicative response. And then last, you want to ignore any of the problem behavior. This is also called extinction. And you do not want to provide reinforcement. And if needed, you can use punishers if reinforcement has been ruled out, is not working. And then after that, once problem behaviors have decreased in your intervention, there are some steps to do after functional communication training has been used for a while. So you'll need to thin the schedule reinforcement, and that means you're just going to do it less. You're not going to be giving as much reinforcement because hopefully they've learned it by now, and they don't need as much reinforcement to promote to say this communicative response. And then you're going to try and create different strategies to promote generalization. Generalization is where it's able to be used in different settings, such as home, at school, or in the clinic if they go to a clinic for therapy or anything like that. And you would do this by using various trainers or teachers or just other people. Make sure that they're using this communicative response to all people. That way we know they really are understanding that this is what we need to engage in instead of the behavior. And then you need to teach those people how to respond to when there is challenging behavior. Make sure that they ignore it and that they prompt them to use their communicative response. And then next would be create different types of situations in the natural environment. That way it's not so prompted. You know, they need to say it like in all different environments, and that way it's natural to them. And then the fifth step would be, once the learner has the main communicative response learned, increase complexity. So, for example, you might say a communicative response would be share, and then you would move on to them saying, I want share, or just increasing that to be more complex than just saying the word share in the beginning. And then last, always make sure your reinforcer is very effective. That way they're always motivated to say this communicative response.
Okay, so for the materials needed to do functional communication training, they're going to vary per situation. But for those that are using PECs, you're going to need the PECs icons and the communication devices that the people use. If the people are all sign or vocal, then you're not going to need the devices. But if they do, you'll need those. Materials to conduct the functional behavior assessment are things to record the data on. So these can be ABC data sheets, scatter plots, functional assessment summaries, things like that. And then you're also going to need reinforcers for the people. These can be things such as stickers, edibles, toys that they enjoy, just as long as they are an actual reinforcer.
So a functional behavior assessment, also known as an FBA, is a method of assessing or finding information on the purpose of a problem behavior. What purpose that behavior serves to the person exhibiting the behavior. There are considered to be 4 functions of behavior: to escape from a task or a stimulus, like trying to get out of doing your homework; to get attention; to get a tangible item, like we talked about earlier with kids wanting toys and taking them away; or for sensory stimulation. Once you have determined the function of a behavior, then you can design an intervention where you can find an appropriate replacement behavior, but you have to make sure that that replacement behavior serves the same function as the problem behavior you're trying to replace.
The communicative response is the behavior that is able to convey information in the form of equally understood language. This could be verbal behavior with normal talking, sign language with motor behavior, a picture exchange communication system or PECS, body gestures and hand gestures. This could be written behavior with texts or other forms of written language. But one thing that needs to be considered is that they all need to be able to be selected and responsive. Their communicative response needs to be able to be work for all parties. And what this means is that we need to consider the response effort, which is the response that requires the least amount of effort compared to the problem behavior, because the problem behavior is occurring because it is easier for that individual instead of separate behavior that's more appropriate. So making the response the desired response or the communicative response needs to require less effort to be able to have a higher chance of displaying. It also needs to be socially recognized, as all parties and other people outside of the parties must be able to understand what the behavior means. And this also means that the speed of which the communicative response is taught, it has to be easy and simple so that everyone involved can learn it. So that means verbal children can be able to learn it, nonverbal children could be able to learn it, etc. The figure that is shown in the picture in the slide shows that a basic form of how the dimensions of communication would be, where the person who is speaking, or the speaker, has some sort of form of communication, either verbal or written in this case. And then that is being given to the destination or the listener. And the content of both is recognized as tree in this case. Who would implement functional communication and how will it be implemented? The BCBAs, teachers, parents, and caregivers are all able to implement functional communication properly. However, in deciding who should implement it, they must consider the initial teaching conditions of like how much time it would take to be able to teach functional communication training to the primary teacher, or it's more relevant to the client itself, the child itself. The strategies using to promote generalization, having multiple teachers is more valuable than, so in this case, anyone who has most relevant, is the most relevant teacher for the child would be the most likely to show benefits for success for functional communication training. And how it will be implemented will be of contriving situations and either making them in a controlled setting or into a natural setting, having a prompting system where it would focus on least to most prompting, as we discussed earlier, or vice versa with most to least, and having differential reinforcement, as we explained earlier as well.
When teaching a skill, prompting should be used most to least intrusively. This is to try to ensure that the person is not erring. The picture on this slide the picture on this slideshow depicts the levels of prompting. For instance, when teaching a child to use sign language, you will physically prompt them by putting your hand over their hand to form the sign for the item that they want. You will slowly fade your prompts as the child becomes more independent with the skill. Next, you will model the sign to them to prompt them to ask for the correct thing. As they become more independent with this, you may gesture or point that they need to use the sign. You do this to assure the person is not becoming dependent on your prompts in order to be successful and can perform the skill independently. When a skill has already been learned and mastered, least to most prompting should be used. For instance, if a child that regularly and independently uses PECS errs on what they're asking for, you may use this. You may verbally remind them that they need to use their PECS. If no response, gesture to them, such as pointing to their device. If that still doesn't work, model yourself using the PECS for them. If that still doesn't work, physically move their hand to use the PECS. When this occurs, the instructor should errorlessly teach the skills by using the most to least intrusive prompting again.
Another method to teach FCT is differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. Differential reinforcement of alternative behavior is it reinforces an alternative behavior that when displayed, it decreases the chance of the problem behavior occurring. An alternative behavior is one that is physically incompatible with the problem behavior, and that's the one that should be selected. Another factor for an alternative behavior is one that serves the same function as the problem behavior. So now, when the problem behavior is attempted by the student or by the child, you can perform either one of two. You can perform differential reinforcement in one of two ways. First way is to ignore the inappropriate behavior and reinforce the alternative behavior that you are trying to teach. In this case, it would be FCT. Another way to do it is to once the inappropriate behavior is performed, it is interrupted and redirected to perform the alternative behavior. You're not ignoring it, you're just stopping it in its tracks and redirecting the student or child to perform the expected appropriate behavior. And once they do that, you then reinforce that behavior in order to strengthen it. References. 17th, LPN. Okay, I think we're done.